couple of years since I worked on this video about colorism, and when I first made this video I had intended for it to be the first in a three-part series about colorism and its sisters its sisters being texturism and featureism. And while I'm still very proud of that video, I think that video stands on its own and it was very well done. I was having a hard time at the time really working on videos parts 2 and 3. Parts 2 and 3 were supposed to be standalone videos about featureism and texturism, but then I realized like there's not enough meat to featureism and texturism on their own, and that's because in my opinion featureism and texturism work better together. Like they work best hand in hand. And so I just thought, why don't I do a video where I talk about how and why featureism and texturism work best in tandem. So in this video, we're going to be talking about 5 old Hollywood starlets who all had different accesses to featureism and texturism privilege, or featurist and texturist privilege, and what that meant and how their access to that level of privilege helped them to reach the ultimate goal being achieving whiteness. So yeah, let's talk about it.
Okay, shut up. What do I care about that? He's only the manager of the show. I'm the star. I'm the big star around here. Nobody tells me what to do. I tell them.
It's good, Juliana. Gosh, I never thought I didn't have to learn anybody like you.
Glad you enjoyed your vacation.
Vacation? How come you can't?
So colorism is a fairly straightforward concept. It's easy for us to see it, grasp onto what it is, and acknowledge it. But featureism and texturism are different, and that's because for lack of a better word, they're nonsensical, but also it kind of fluctuates, right? Like if your features are the smallest they can possibly be, you're even closer to that beauty standard mark. But if they're smaller than mine, for example, then at the very least, you're hitting it. Like right here, this right here, these right here, not hitting the standard. Not hitting the standard, Bookie. But the further away you get from my particular phenotype, the closer you get. But if you're as close to the phenotype as you can be, y'all, it's ridiculous. It don't make no damn sense. And y'all gonna see why when we get into our 5 case studies, okay? So let's start with definitions of texturism and featureism. Texturism is the discrimination faced by those with coarser, more Afrocentric hair. This anti-Black sentiment is predicated on the idea that hair textures closer to European hair types are superior, and that the further a hair texture deviates from that ideal, the more inferior it is. In fact, the hair typing system was created by Nazi German scientist Eugene Fischer, who used this hair typing method to gauge Namibians' whiteness based on their hair and the looseness of their hair. Over 100 years later, this baseless assertion still stands as a way to gauge the integrity of Black people's hair. Examples of texturism are often found in media. Think about any teen movie or chick flick that you've ever seen. One of the first things they do is throw away their glasses because God forbid you have a disability, and straighten their hair.
Like a wolf. He's all right.
Typically, the characters start out with curly, coarse, or frizzy hair, which gets some kind of hair straightening treatment. And if a character is depicted as having a bad hair day, it's not uncommon for them to be shown as having an afro or frizzy hair. And at some point, we need to have the conversation about the aesthetics of clowns and how that's literally just an evolution of blackface minstrelsy, the big nose, the red lips, the afros, like, come on. But that's a video for another day. We'll get there. Don't worry. For the time being, what you need to know is that texturism in the media, whether it means to consciously or not, which it definitely is trying to subliminally paint a picture here.
You broke my glasses.
You broke my brush.
Basically paints coarse, kinky, and frizzy hair as something ugly and undesirable that needs to be fixed or tamed. According to the Union of National Employees, featureism is a form of discrimination that operates subtly but very powerfully in society. And the subtlety is exactly why I had a hard time making a video about it on its own. Featureism is a discrimination against people with certain facial features, often that more closely resemble stereotypical Afrocentric features. Examples of featureism can be found in social media, which is very looks based, and lookism runs rampant on social media websites. Particularly, I'm thinking about an instance on Twitter where a Twitter user compared Tiana Taylor and Ari Lennox to dogs despite complimenting them at the very same time. In fact, featureism often rears its ugly head in interpersonal relationships, specifically with darker skinned Black women. Darker skinned Black women and girls might hear things like, "You're pretty for a dark skinned girl," "You'd be pretty if you weren't so dark," "If you were only lighter, you'd look better," or "You're pretty for a Black girl." Because according to Western beauty standards, beauty can't belong to Blackness. For more in-depth information on featureism and texturism, I'd highly recommend checking out some of the articles I used for these definitions. I'll link them below. Now, let's get on to our old Hollywood examples and talk about how each of these women had a different experience with featureism and colorism, and how that helped them to gain proximity or the access that gave them to whiteness. Starting with the lady and her music herself, Miss Lena Horne. But Miss Lena Mary Calhoun Horne was born to a Black bourgeoisie class, meaning that she was born to the Black upper class of America. Her family had some measure of social standing as well as a little bit of wealth, and this is because Lena was a direct descendant of John C. Calhoun, the 7th Vice President of the United States. Because of this, Lena and her family enjoyed a level of privilege that wasn't enjoyed by most Black people, especially Black folks of a darker skin tone and a more Afrocentric phenotype who didn't have direct lineages to whiteness. That being the case, however, Lena's grandparents, particularly her grandmother, instilled a pride in her Blackness that would not allow her to let her granddaughter pass as white. But it was still Lena's light skin, loose hair texture, and small features that got her a coveted position as a Cotton Club dancer, one of the most prestigious jumping points for Black women who hoped to enter the entertainment industry. At the time, the standard for a Cotton Club dancer was to be tall, tan, and terrific, meaning they had to pass the brown paper bag test as well as the comb test, which Lena did with flying colors. And it was Lena's proximity to the white phenotype that got her the point where she could be seen by people even higher up in the pecking order of the entertainment industry. It was because of this and Lena's immense talent and beauty that she was able to enter into cafe society as a nightclub singer. And it was her entree into that society, into that world of entertainment, that got her seen by Hollywood figures such as Arthur Freed, MGM's premier composer and writer. Freed orchestrated a meeting between Lena and Louis B. Mayer, the big wig of MGM himself. And once he had took a look at her and heard her talent, he was sold that she could be something of a crossover star. Things were moving really fast for Lena to the point where she felt nervous and uncertain about what was being done. She wasn't sure about how quickly everything was moving for her. So she called up her father, a slick-talking, numbers-running gambler, and asked him if he could fly down to Hollywood and help her out with the negotiation process, which her daddy absolutely did. We stan a good daddy, okay? We love that over here. Louis B. Mayer, who had been primarily raised, I believe, by his mother, I want to say she was a single mother or he had a much closer relationship with his mother, had a soft spot for parent-child relationships, and was particularly just had a soft spot that a lot of studio heads didn't quite have. So when she asked if he could have a meeting with her father, as unprecedented as it may have seemed for him to sit down with two Black people to discuss the future of one of his future starlets, he allowed it. And when they sat down, Lena's father's stipulation was that he film his daughter in a respectable manner and not give her stereotypical roles, even lying to say, "I can buy my daughter her own maid if I want," which stumped Louis B. Mayer, who was probably not used to being talked to by a Black man this way, but he assured him and her that Lena would be filmed in a complimentary light and would be given good, diverse roles. And for the most part, they did try to do that. They had a problem, however. Lena was too light and too Eurocentric looking to always convincingly play black women, which would lead to them putting skin darkening makeup on her so that she could more closely fit the stereotype. Eventually, it was offered to Lena, or even suggested to Lena, that she try to pass as Latina. If nothing else, her features and her hair type could convincingly pass her off as a Latina woman, and that would get her bigger roles, more diverse roles, and more opportunities. But Lena, being a self-loving black woman, staunchly refused. Why Latina and not white? Possibly because Lena had already gotten her start as a dancer at the Cotton Club, which means that she would have at least had to pass off as black in order to do so. But because she didn't look black, if they just tweaked a few things here and there, they would have been able to convincingly pass her off as Latina. Also, I don't think Lena's phenotype and hair texture, which her hairdresser on set refused to do, would have been able to convincingly pass off as white in Hollywood. But they're right. If she had gone and passed as Latina, which, by the way, Latina is not a race, but white people were not committed to intellect back then. That being said, if she had passed off as Latina, she would have had more opportunities. However, she refused. And because of this, her career stagnated. But it would have gone at least as far as the next woman we're going to talk about, Donna Drake. Donna Drake is such an interesting case study, because this woman was oh my God, like when you triple threat. I didn't know a whole lot about Donna Drake until I started researching her for this video. And when I tell y'all, that bitch is talented. Go look up Donna Drake dancing. That girl has moves for fucking days. Had she been contemporary, she would have given people like Janet Jackson and Ciara an absolute run for their money. She was incredible with her body. And she knew that she had star power. But she also knew that she looked too much like a black woman to ever make it quite as a white woman. But she could get close, which is why she would go on to bill herself as Rita Rio. And I think before that, she took on some other kind of Latina sounding name as well, in order to get more roles. In fact, I think to enter her first major either film or Broadway production, she took on a Latina name and even started learning Spanish so she could more convincingly pass herself off as a Latina woman. This ended up working for her because Donna's unique beauty, her Latin last name, and her talent all carried her into Hollywood, where she was billed as Rita Rio and was given roles that kind of played into that spicy Latina thing. And what's really funny to me is the tongue-in-cheek song and dance numbers that they would give her. There's the one that I'm playing for y'all now. The lyrics are like, "The girl is different. The girl is different. The girl can dance." And I'm like, now y'all gonna put this black woman up against all these white women talk about the girl is different, the girl can dance. Yeah, you damn sure right, she different. Oh, and when she entered into Hollywood, she was then turned into Donna Drake. I've been saying it wrong the whole time. She went by Donna to kind of further emphasize the Latin aspect of her fake identity. She cut off her family members, which included pretty prominent black members of the Philadelphia black community, and went on to enjoy not the most prolific career. She was never really able to break into A-list roles, but she did get more steady work than any of the other women on the list that we're going to talk about for the black ladies. She was regularly billed as if you needed a jungle girl or a girl to wear a floral printed hula skirt or something like that, or you needed someone to say unga bunga over a white man's body while looking pretty, you went to Donna Drake, okay? She was going to do that for you, right? That was what she was. That was what she could get, with the limitations placed on her because of her phenotype and her hair texture. When you look at Donna, yes, she's very light. I'm sure she was doing things like staying out of the sun and possibly using skin lightening creams to keep her skin light. But you can look at her facial features. You can look at her hair texture. You can see the texture in her hair. And you can look at the darkness of her skin. And you can tell, I personally can tell that this is a black woman for the most part. There are some pictures where I'm like, wow, okay, she looked like a spicy white lady. But for the most part, you can tell that she is a black woman. However, because of white people's limited beliefs of what black, white, Latinx, etc. people could look like, they passed her off as Latina, and she was relegated for most of her career to the sort of pigeonholed island girl or spicy Latina roles, which is so unfortunate because that still very much boxed her in a way that her talent was way too big for. Definitely look into Donna Drake. Super interesting lady, super talented woman, the get over of a lifetime, because I'm sorry, that lady looked like a black woman to me, y'all. I don't know what white people were thinking. Anyway, moving on to our next case study. Frederica Freddie Washington got her start in the 1920s in all-black films that were independently produced. And when she was discovered by white Hollywood, they immediately knew that they had something on their hands. Not only was she hugely talented, but she had a crossover look. She was fair-skinned. I'm talking literally like buttermilk cream white. She had green eyes, and unlike Lena and Donna, who I feel you could see the texture in both of their hair, Freddie's hair was mostly straight. And Freddie was picked up to play the tragic mulatto character Piola in Imitation of Life, a film about two mothers raising their daughters, one white, one black, together. Piola's tragedy is that she is an extremely white-looking child born to an extremely stereotypically black-looking mother. And because of that, she's never able to access the type of privileges and freedoms that a woman who looks like her would had she been born into a white family. And this haunts both Piola and her mother throughout the entire movie. It's a very tragic underpinning of this tale. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it here, to me, and I'm not sure if this was what was intended, I feel like the fact that Piola, like they chose to have a daughter like Piola born to a woman who looks like her mother. I can't remember her mother's name. I can't remember her mother's name. But I feel like the fact that they chose this extremely white looking child to be born to this black mother, is it just me, or is there like a little bit of like an undertone there of like rape? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, doesn't it come off like they were trying to kind of make a commentary about how black women are often sexually assaulted by white men? I don't know. Maybe not. Either way, Freddie's light skin and green eyes had always been, up until this point, a point of contention for her, because she knew that there was an opportunity for her to pass as white, and plenty of people had asked about her passing as white, including her own managers when she entered into the entertainment industry. But Freddie maintained her position that, one, like Lena, she was proud of her blackness, and two, that you didn't have to be white to be good or to be talented, and she refused to do either one. She wanted to get roles based on who she was that showcased her own talent in the body that she occupied, which in her mind was the body of a black woman. And it's so unfortunate because as many different times as Hollywood would go on in the future to write stories about tragic mulatto figures or white women or black women who looked white who were trying to operate in society, Freddie definitely had a place. I mean, she would have been typecasted, but she definitely had a place. And in comparison to the remake, which just cast a brunette, brown-eyed white woman as the so-called light-skinned black woman in the reboot of this movie, Freddie's actual connection to the source material gave this film and gave her performance a gravitas and authenticity that these white women could not capture. Because Freddie refused to pass herself off as white, she had a similar dilemma to Lena Horne. Her alignment with her black heritage meant that she couldn't play opposite as leading lady to the white men of the day, because that would, one, upset white and black audiences, but mostly white audiences, and two, it would go against the anti-miscegenation laws that said that black and white people were not to have intimate relationships or be married. Not only that, they also had a hard time casting her against black men because, once again, she looked like a white woman, and that too would have upset white audiences. I mean, for us to be the so-called victims, for them to be constantly pulling the whole "you're being a victim" card, it sure does seem like they are awfully sensitive little princesses, you know what I mean? Lena too had this same dilemma, and so because of that, Freddie's career slowed significantly and basically stalled. And it's unfortunate because of all of these women, Freddie, I believe, had she chosen to pass as white, I definitely think she would have had an A-list career similar to a Hedy Lamarr or what's the lady that played Scarlett and Gone with the Wind, Vivian Leigh, Greta Garbo. These were the women that her management told her that they wanted to make her into. And she definitely had that look. She definitely had the talent. She just refused to play the game. And you gotta respect that. Now let's move on to the white ladies. Let's start with Margarita Carmen Cancino herself, aka Rita Hayworth. Bet you didn't know she was of Spanish descent, and that was done absolutely on purpose. Now, at the time, her mother and father decided to darken her hair, which was naturally brown to black, to play up the whole Spanish flamenco dancer aspect, because her father was intent on making Margarita a star in Hollywood films as a dancer. So she was his dance partner and show pony for the majority of her young life. Unfortunately, her father was also her abuser. And because of this, he beat stage presence and obedience into her, which made her great at taking direction and learning her routines on a timely manner. But it also made her extremely vulnerable to the predators of Hollywood. Rita, when she was approached by Hollywood, was really the perfect victim to the Hollywood machine. They took her in, which was exactly what her father wanted, and decided they would make her a star. However, they weren't going to do so with her being Margarita Carmen Cancino. Now, she had some roles before this, playing as Spanish dancers in Hollywood, and that was kind of what made them take notice. But they knew that they could take it a little bit further with her if they just tweaked her appearance a little bit. So, of course, the first thing to go was that name. That was much too ethnic for them. They dropped Marga and called her Rita. They dropped the Carmen, and her mother's maiden name was Haworth, so they added a Y so that it had a bit of a snap to it, and Rita Hayworth was born. Through a series of plastic surgeries, Rita's ethnic features started to be shaved down. Her nose, I think her jawline was shaved down, and then they did the slow and painful process of lifting back her hairline until more of her forehead showed. This was through a treatment called electrolysis, which would slowly raise up her hairline to make her brow a bit more prominent. They did this with Marilyn Monroe as well. Once it was all said and done, they had to get rid of the black hair, and so they chose a fiery red for Rita's new look, and the Rita Hayworth that we all know and love was born. And it paid off big time, because Rita was one of the biggest stars, sex symbols, leading ladies of the 1940s and early 50s. She was the love goddess, and a lot of the times they would kind of harken back to her like Spanish heritage by having her do dance numbers, particularly exotic dance numbers, or placing her in these exotic Latinx like locations, these like Hispanic whatever locations. Very just tongue in cheek. Again, Hollywood would always do a little wink and a nod, but they would never say anything straightforward. But because Rita was closer to being able to play the game than Lena or Donna or even Freddie herself, who probably would have had to take bleaching creams just to make sure she didn't tan too much, she was able to have the kind of career that women only dreamed of in Hollywood. And again, I want to emphasize, this is because Rita was a white woman. She was a white woman. Her having a Spanish-born father, a Spaniard father, that does not make her anything other than white. But it's Hollywood. It's Hollywood. It's white America. We don't do intelligence. We don't do intellect around here. We don't do logic and common sense, y'all. We got to suspend it. We got to put a pin in it because we can't do that. And this whole conversation make any kind of sense. So moving forward to our very last case study, Miss Merle Oberon. Merle is extremely fascinating. Going through and reading Merle's story, I highly recommend the podcast You Must Remember This. They have a story on Merle Oberon and her process of passing as white. But I'm going to just go into how crazy Merle's whole situation is. So unlike all of these women, Merle didn't have any connection to America whatsoever. Merle was actually born in India to a British soldier father and a Eurasian woman, a half Indian, half European woman. And this was something that happened often because of Britain's colonialism in India. There was a lot of, just going to say it, just going to name the thing, rape that would happen from the British soldiers towards Indian women, creating this new fusion of person. That sounds kind of bad. That sounds a little dehumanizing. Creating this kind of new class or caste of people called Eurasians. And Eurasians were they were in a very unfortunate position in this society. They weren't fully Indian, so they didn't fit into the Indian caste system, and they weren't white, so they definitely didn't fit into the white caste system. However, Eurasian women were highly exoticized and fetishized and sought out by these British soldiers who wanted playthings and mistresses when they were overseas. This would work in favor for the Eurasian women for a little while to get, maybe a little bit of money, some jewels, some benefits, just a little bit to hold them over. But these women were never married. They were never made into wives. They were never able to break out of that social caste that they were forced into. And this was the position that Merle found herself in with her mother. Y'all, I have to give some more Merle lore drop. So Merle was the product of rape, right? Because her actual mother was a teenage girl by the name of Charlotte. Charlotte was also the product of rape. Her mother was another Eurasian woman. So 3 times over, Merle was the product of rape by this disgusting power dynamic between British men and Indian women. And this colored Merle's perception of herself and the desires that she had. Now, her grandmother never much cared for Merle's mom, and if I had to guess, it's probably because, well, one, this is a child born to rape who solidifies your position on this lower caste scale that you find yourself in. But also, I think that Merle's mother was probably more Eurasian looking, more dark skin, more Indian looking, to be, so frank about it. Merle, however, was very much the ideal. She was white looking. She had very pale skin. She had very Eurocentric features, and it was really only her eye shape, her accent, and her thick dark hair that really gave away her Southeast Asian heritage. Either way, Merle's grandmother took Merle away from her mom, the teenage girl that gave birth to her, and moved her overseas to Britain, and they both cut that girl out of Merle's life. Could you imagine being abandoned by your mom and taking your baby? What? Child, oh my God. Tragic. When I tell y'all tragic, it's crazy that Hollywood has not made a Merle Oberon biopic yet, because it would have been so fascinating. It would be fascinating. Anyway, she took Merle to Britain, where I guess she had dreams of stardom for Merle, and it paid off because Merle became an extra in British films, and she was discovered by Americans who took one look at her and was like, oh yeah, we can do something with this girl. She was brought to Hollywood, and again, the makeover machine started doing its thing. Now, her original name was much longer and also had Irish surnames in it, because I believe her father was Irish, or one of her grandparents was Irish. So they dropped that and they shortened her name to Merle Oberon. In fact, her original last name was O'Brien. They shortened it to Merle Oberon. They didn't have to do much with her looks, but Merle knew the truth about herself. And so Merle began taking bleaching tablets, melanin suppressing tablets, and putting bleaching cream on. She also was very careful about how she went outside, and she had to work very hard because every so often you could hear the slip of her Southeast Asian accent come out. For the rest of her life, she would maintain this lie to the point where it had begun making her sick and giving her mental breakdowns towards the end of her life. And eventually she did have to stop holding on so tightly to her secret, but she would never come out with the fact that she was an Indian woman. Even so, of all of these women, just like Rita Hayworth, Merle had an extremely prolific career, and actually she had a pretty long career. Her years, I believe she was active from like the 1930s to like the early 1950s. Eventually it started to slow, but for women in Hollywood at the time, that was pretty good. But I say all that to say, looking at all 5 of these women, I hope that you can see how phenotype and hair texture play sort of this role together in how much access one has to whiteness and how far they can get with it. The books Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Did You Hear About Kitty Carr both explore themes of what it means to pass as white as a woman of color. In this day and age, to give you like more of a modern perspective of how featureism and texturism are integral to passing as white, celebrities that could probably have passed as white back in old Hollywood would be celebrities such as Halsey, Tori Kelly, Mariah Carey, Logic. In contrast to them, people like Doja Cat, Colin Kaepernick, and Zendaya would definitely not have been able to pass as white. That doesn't stop them, however, for finding themselves having privilege over people with darker skin tones or more Afrocentric phenotypes. Zendaya and other light-skinned actresses like her get cast in positions that were always originally meant for darker-skinned women all the time, particularly books that were written with the intention of a darker-skinned woman being at the forefront of the narrative, or for actresses who start out as dark-skinned to get replaced by lighter-skinned, looser texture-haired, smaller feature-having biracial women. This erasure is not innocent. It is just a continuation of Hollywood's desire to redefine what blackness is and what it looks like. And for Hollywood, blackness that closer mirrors whiteness is the ideal, which is so unfortunate because we lose out on so many different talented people who could be leading these narratives. The interesting thing about featureism and texturism is that you can definitely see it at play in the modeling industry. When you look at African models, sure, they are absolutely gorgeous and they're all over the place, but look at their features. They're not putting African models with features that look like Michaela Cohen's on the runway. They're putting models with small button noses and high nose bridges and round apple cheeks and almond-shaped eyes on the runways. These women have the features that more closely align with Eurocentric beauty standards, but at the same time, texturism comes into play because these women's heads are shaved bald or forced down into braids. Very rarely do you see them rocking a diverse range of gorgeous hairstyles that play to their hair texture and type. Featureism and texturism playing out right there on the runways. It's disheartening and it's unfortunate, but it is how our media keeps control on us and our idea of what is beautiful. It's how the media and, larger sense, our government tells us how we should feel about ourselves and people who have these phenotypes and have these features and have this hair type. And if we're not able to recognize it and call it out for being the devious suppression of diversity when we dare to call ourselves a melting pot as a country, we lose out on more than we gain. Because we've seen time and time again that there is plenty of talent to be shared by people who have quote unquote nappy hair, big noses, big lips, dark skin. Dark-skinned people with Afrocentric features and Afro-textured hair lead full, diverse, interesting, and complex lives and have full, diverse, interesting, and complex talents. And we are starting to see that more and more, but we still have a long way to go. We need love interests, women love interests with big noses. We need women love interests who wake up and have matted hair in the morning and have to spray it with some moisturizer to get it going. You know what I mean? Like, we need men who are fat and not just the funny fat friend, but the funny fat friend who also happens to have a loving relationship. We need these diverse depictions because we need to see the fullness of the human experience play out on screen, because that is how we as human beings recognize the humanity in each other. So I hope that you guys enjoyed that. I hope it made sense, and I hope that you now start to think a little bit more about featureism and texturism, how they work, how you might contribute to them, how you might play into them, how you might view them, and that you work to unlearn some of the more harmful aspects of how you too might hold featurist and texturist ideals. That is always the goal. We are always learning and then unlearning and then relearning. Okay. All right, y'all. That's all I got. Until next time. Bye.